Elena had never known a life of luxury. Born an orphan, she had spent her childhood in foster care, moving from one temporary home to another. By the time she turned 18, she was on her own, with no family, no financial support, and nowhere to go. But Elena was not one to complain. She had learned early on that life was not fair, and the only way to survive was to work hard and stay grateful for whatever she had. Her job at Mike's Laundry, a small dry cleaning shop in town, was far from glamorous, but it provided her with a place to stay. The owner, Mike Carter, was a tired, middle-aged man who ran the shop alone until Elena started working there. In exchange for her help, he let her sleep in a small storage room in the back. It wasn't much, just a thin mattress on the floor, a small desk lamp, and a few hooks on the wall where she hung her second-hand clothes, but it was a place to call home. Every morning, Elena woke up before dawn, washed her face with cold water from the utility sink, and got straight to work. She sorted clothes, ran the steam press, folded shirts with precision, and greeted customers with a quiet smile. Most people barely noticed her. She was just the girl at the laundry, invisible to the world. But to Elena, as long as she had work and a roof over her head, she had hope. One chilly autumn morning, everything changed. Elena was finishing her breakfast, a simple meal of toast and coffee, when the front doorbell jingled. She quickly set her cup down and rushed to the counter. A well-dressed woman in a bright yellow designer dress stood there, holding a small silk scarf in one hand and scrolling through her phone with the other. Vanessa Caldwell. Elena recognized her immediately. Vanessa was a wealthy socialite, known for her extravagant shopping sprees and short temper. She was also engaged to Alexander Pierce, a real estate mogul who was one of Mike's best customers. Elena, eager to do her job well, reached for a bottle of stain remover on the counter. But in her rush, her elbow knocked over a small cup of water. Before she could catch it, the water splashed onto Vanessa's dress. The moment froze. Vanessa gasped, staring in horror at the dark water spots spreading across the expensive fabric. Her face twisted with outrage. "Are you serious? Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" she snapped, her voice loud enough for passers-by to hear. Elena's heart pounded. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident. Please, let me clean it. Don't touch me." Vanessa recoiled, as if Elena's hands were covered in dirt. "You're pathetic. First, you ruined my dress, and now you want to fix it with those filthy hands?" Before Elena could explain, Vanessa stormed past her and marched into Mike's office. Elena felt her stomach drop. She could hear Vanessa's voice rising behind the closed door. "If you don't fire her, I swear I will never bring my business here again. And trust me, I will make sure my fiancé and his colleagues do the same." Mike's response was muffled, but moments later, he stepped out, his face tense with regret. "Elena," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. "I have no choice." Elena's hands trembled. "Please, Mike. This is my home. I have nowhere else to go." Mike sighed, rubbing the back of his head. "I know, kid. But I can't afford to lose customers like her. You understand, don't you?" Elena swallowed hard. No, she didn't understand. But it didn't matter. With nothing but a small duffel bag holding her few belongings, she stepped out of the only home she had ever known. The crisp October wind bit at her skin as she walked aimlessly down the sidewalk, past the familiar streets she had once considered safe. She had no car, no savings, and nowhere to sleep. That morning, Elena had a job, a home, and a sense of stability. By evening, she had nothing. The night had been long and cold. Elena had spent it huddled under a thin blanket, lying on a patch of cement inside an unfinished building. The structure had no doors, no insulation, just bare walls and an exposed ceiling. The wind howled through the gaps, sending chills deep into her bones. She barely slept, her body too tense, her mind too restless. By dawn, she knew she couldn't stay there. She needed a plan. With her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, Elena walked through the streets of town, her stomach growling in protest. She had no money for breakfast, but hunger was the least of her worries. She needed work. Any work. Her feet led her to the Pierce Plaza construction site, a massive high-rise project that was the talk of the town. It was owned by Alexander Pierce, a man whose name she had heard often, though never in a way that connected to her life. The site was bustling with workers in hard hats, steel-toed boots, and neon vests. The scent of fresh-cut lumber and wet cement filled the air. Elena hesitated at the entrance, gripping her bag tightly. She had never done construction work before, but she was strong, and more than anything, she was desperate. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. A burly man with a clipboard stood near the entrance, barking orders at a group of workers unloading heavy cement bags from a truck. He noticed Elena immediately. "This is a work zone, lady." "You lost?" he asked, barely glancing at her. "No, sir," she replied quickly. I'm looking for work." That got his attention. He gave her a once-over, his eyes narrowing. "Work? You want to work here?" Elena nodded. "I can carry materials, clean up, anything you need. I'll work hard." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "This ain't a job for women, sweetheart. We lift 100-pound beams here. You think you can handle that?" Elena clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "I may not look like much, but I can work harder than most. Just give me a chance." A few of the workers nearby had stopped to listen, smirking at the sight of a young woman asking for a job in a male-dominated field. But one of them, a grizzled old foreman named Joe Peterson, stepped forward. "Let her talk to the boss," Joe muttered to the clipboard man. "Let him decide." The man sighed but nodded. "Fine. Wait here. The boss'll be here soon." Elena stood off to the side as the workers resumed their tasks. The sun had risen higher, and the morning air carried the rhythmic pounding of hammers and the deep hum of machinery. After what felt like forever, a black pickup truck pulled up near the entrance. A tall man in a white shirt and steel-toe boots stepped out, surveying the site with a practiced eye. His presence commanded immediate respect. This had to be Alexander Pierce himself. The clipboard man approached him first, whispering something while nodding in Elena's direction. Alexander turned his head, his sharp gaze locking onto her. He walked over, stopping just a few feet away. "You're the one asking for work?" Elena straightened her back. "Yes, sir." Alexander studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You ever worked construction before?" "No, sir," Elena admitted, "but I learned fast. I'm strong, and I don't complain." A flicker of something crossed his face, curiosity, maybe. Then he looked at Joe. "What do you think?" Joe shrugged. "She's got guts. Could use an extra pair of hands cleaning up debris. It's not lifting steel, but it's work." Alexander nodded slowly. Then he turned back to Elena. "All right. You start tomorrow. 7 a.m. sharp. If you're late, don't bother coming." Elena's heart leapt. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." As she walked away, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: hope. The sun was already beginning to set when Alexander Pierce arrived at the construction site. He had stopped by for an unexpected inspection, but his attention quickly shifted when he noticed something unusual. Elena, a young woman, was carrying a heavy load of bricks across the dusty ground. Most women wouldn't last a day on a construction site, and yet, there she was, sweating under the late afternoon heat, moving like she had no other choice. He turned to Joe Peterson, the seasoned foreman who had vouched for her. "How's the girl holding up?" Joe wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Better than most. Doesn't complain, doesn't slow down." But, he hesitated before adding, "She's exhausted. Won't admit it, but she barely eats. Don't think she's got anywhere to sleep either." Alexander frowned. He had suspected as much. The first time he saw Elena, he could tell she wasn't just here for a paycheck, she was surviving. He walked over to where she was stacking bricks. "Elena." She turned quickly, startled. "Sir?" "Come with me." Elena hesitated, glancing at Joe, then back at Alexander. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said firmly. "But you can't keep working like this." She stiffened. "Please, sir. I need this job." Alexander sighed. "I'm not firing you. But I know you don't have a place to stay." Elena opened her mouth to argue, but the look on his face told her he already knew the truth. She lowered her gaze. "Come with me," he repeated. "I have a guest house. You can stay there and work in my home instead." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Work in his home? That wasn't what she had expected. "Sir, I don't want charity." Alexander let out a short laugh. "It's not charity. It's a job. I need someone to help manage the house, and you need a safe place to sleep. You'll work for it, just like you do here." Elena looked at Joe again, as if searching for permission. Joe simply nodded. "All right," she said quietly. Alexander led her to his black pickup truck. As she climbed in, she couldn't help but feel self-conscious. Her clothes were covered in dust, her hair was messy, and her hands were calloused from hard labor. She didn't belong in a car like this, or in the world Alexander Pierce lived in. The ride was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. After a few minutes, Alexander broke the silence. "How long have you been homeless?" Elena swallowed. "Since last week. Before that? I worked at a laundromat. Slept in the back room. Then I lost the job." Alexander glanced at her briefly before turning his focus back to the road. "That's not much of a life." Elena gave a small, sad smile. It was better than sleeping outside. By the time they reached the Pierce estate, the sky had darkened into a soft navy blue, and the grand house before her was illuminated by warm golden lights. Elena's heart pounded. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen: tall glass windows, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a driveway longer than any street she had walked on. She didn't belong here. As she stepped out of the truck, the front door swung open, revealing Vanessa Caldwell, Alexander's fiancée. The moment Vanessa laid eyes on Elena, her expression twisted into something between shock and disgust. "Who is this?" she demanded, crossing her arms. Alexander remained calm. "Her name is Elena. She's going to be working here." Vanessa's eyes flicked over Elena's dirty clothes and tired face. "Here? In this house?" "Yes." Vanessa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Are you joking, Alex? Look at her." Elena lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of Vanessa's scrutiny. "I wasn't asking for your opinion, Vanessa," Alexander said sharply. She's staying. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, her hands curling into fists. But she didn't argue. Not yet. Alexander turned back to Elena. Follow me. I'll show you to your room. As they walked inside, Elena could feel Vanessa's burning gaze on her back. She had a feeling her troubles were just beginning. From the moment Elena stepped into the Pierce estate, Vanessa made it clear that she was unwelcome. She never missed a chance to belittle her, throwing sharp remarks whenever Alexander wasn't around. "You're just a stray he picked up," Vanessa sneered one evening as Elena set the dining table. "Don't think for a second that you belong here." Elena kept her head down, refusing to engage. She wasn't here to fight, just to work, just to survive. But Vanessa wasn't satisfied with words alone. She wanted Elena gone. One evening, while Alexander was out handling business, Vanessa saw her opportunity. She prepared a simple dinner for herself, a bowl of soup and bread, and then slipped something inside the soup. A small pinch of crushed medication, enough to make her nauseous but not enough to cause real harm. Then, she called out in a falsely sweet voice. "Elena, can you bring my dinner to the living room?" Elena, always obedient, wiped her hands and carried the tray to where Vanessa lounged on the sofa. As soon as Elena placed the bowl down, Vanessa grabbed a spoonful, took a bite, and dramatically clutched her stomach. "Oh my God," she gasped, dropping the spoon with a loud clang. "What did you do to my food?" Elena froze. "Ma'am?" Vanessa groaned, staggering to her feet, clutching her stomach like she was about to collapse. "You poisoned me," she cried out, her voice loud enough to echo through the house. "I saw you put something in my food." The noise was enough to summon the house staff. Martha, the longtime housekeeper, and James, the driver, rushed into the room, their eyes wide with confusion. "What's going on?" Martha asked. Vanessa pointed a shaking finger at Elena. "She tried to kill me. Call Alexander now." When Alexander arrived minutes later, Vanessa was curled up on the couch, fake tears rolling down her face. "Alex," she whimpered. "I don't know why, but she tried to hurt me. I saw her putting something in my soup." Elena's chest tightened. "That's not true," she said firmly. "I didn't do anything." Vanessa sniffled dramatically. "She's lying. Why would I make this up?" Alexander looked between the two women. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Martha," he said, turning to the housekeeper. "Bring me the security footage." Vanessa's face paled. What?" Alexander crossed his arms. "There are cameras in the kitchen and the dining area. If Elena did what you say she did, we'll see it." Vanessa's breath hitched. She had forgotten about the cameras. Martha left the room and returned a few minutes later with Alexander's laptop. She pulled up the footage and hit play. The room fell silent as the video showed Vanessa alone in the kitchen, crushing pills and stirring them into her own soup. Elena hadn't even been in the room when it happened. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Alex, Alexander slammed the laptop shut. "Enough." His voice was cold. "You lied," he said, his eyes dark with disappointment. "You tried to ruin an innocent woman's life." Vanessa reached for his hand, her voice desperate. "I was just..." "Pack your things." Her lips trembled. "What?" Alexander's jaw clenched. "I said pack your things. You're leaving my house tonight." Vanessa tried to argue, tried to beg, but it was no use. Alexander was done. Within an hour, she was gone. Elena stood in the quiet house, still shaken. She had been so close to losing everything again. Alexander turned to her, his voice softer now. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing me." For the first time in a long time, Elena felt safe. The house felt different after Vanessa left. Quieter. Lighter. Peaceful. Elena, however, wasn't sure what to do with that peace. She had spent so long trying to stay out of the way, avoiding conflict, keeping her head down. Now, for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to constantly defend herself. But even with Vanessa gone, she still felt like a guest in someone else's home. She tried to blend into the background, focusing on her work, cleaning, cooking, making sure everything was in order. But one person noticed her more than ever now. Alexander. At first, he observed from a distance. He noticed how Elena never complained, how she never asked for anything, and how, despite everything, she remained kind. Even after Vanessa had nearly destroyed her life, she didn't hold on to anger. One evening, Alexander came home later than usual. The long hours at the office had drained him, and all he wanted was a moment of silence. But as he stepped inside, he was greeted by something he hadn't expected. The smell of homemade soup. He followed the scent into the kitchen, where Elena was ladling a bowl of chicken and rice soup onto a tray. She turned in surprise when she saw him. "Sir, I didn't hear you come in." Alexander raised an eyebrow, glancing at the tray. "Are you making that for yourself?" Elena shook her head. "No, sir. It's for Martha. She hasn't been feeling well today, so I thought some soup might help." Alexander blinked. It wasn't her job to take care of the housekeeper, but she did it anyway. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Do you always look after people who don't ask for help?" Elena hesitated before answering. "I guess I just know what it's like to have no one looking out for you." Her words settled heavily in the air. Alexander studied her for a moment before stepping forward. "Make another bowl." Elena looked up. "Sir?" He gave her a small nod. "For me. I could use a good meal." She quickly moved to prepare another bowl, setting it on the table for him. Alexander took a seat and lifted the spoon, taking a slow sip. It was perfect. Warm, rich, comforting, like something made with care. He hadn't eaten a meal like this in a long time. As he ate, he glanced at Elena, who was tidying up the kitchen. "You can sit down, you know," he said between bites. She looked at him, unsure. "I still have work to do." Alexander set his spoon down. "Sit, Elena." She hesitated before finally taking a seat across from him. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Alexander spoke. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Elena smiled softly. "From a woman who took care of me in foster care. She wasn't my mother, but she taught me the little things, how to make a meal stretch, how to turn simple ingredients into something good." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "She must have been a good woman." "She was," Elena said, her voice warm with memory. "She used to say that food made with care always tastes better." Alexander took another spoonful. She was right. That night, as he lay in bed, he found himself thinking about Elena, her quiet strength, her kindness, the way she carried herself despite everything she had endured. He had brought her here because she needed a safe place. But now, for the first time, he wondered if he needed her too. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet presence of Elena in the Pierce estate became something Alexander looked forward to. He found himself noticing the smallest things, how she always woke up before dawn, how she hummed softly while tidying up, how she never sat down to eat until everyone else was served. More than once, he caught himself watching her, wondering when she had gone from being just someone he wanted to help to someone he couldn't stop thinking about. And then came the moment he knew. One evening, Alexander arrived home to find Elena sitting outside on the back porch. The sky was a soft shade of pink and orange, the air crisp with the first signs of autumn. She was staring into the distance, lost in thought. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Elena turned, startled. "Of course, sir." Alexander sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to call me sir, you know." She gave a small smile. "Habit, I guess." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Alexander spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot lately." Elena looked at him curiously. "About what?" He took a deep breath, his fingers tightening slightly. "About you." She blinked, surprised. "Me?" Alexander nodded, turning to face her fully. "Elena, I brought you here because I wanted to help you. But somewhere along the way, something changed." He paused, searching for the right words. "You're not just someone I took in. He exhaled, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Elena's heart pounded. "Sir?" "Alexander," he corrected gently. She hesitated, her hands tightening in her lap. "I don't understand." He reached for her hand, his touch warm against the cool evening air. "Elena, I'm in love with you." Elena felt her breath hitch. This had to be a mistake. She wasn't the kind of woman men like Alexander Pierce fell for. "You don't have to say anything," he continued. "But I needed you to know. You are strong, kind, and you make this house feel like home in a way it never did before." Elena swallowed hard. "But I don't belong in your world." Alexander squeezed her hand. "Who says? Money? Status? None of that matters to me. What matters is you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know how to be the kind of woman you deserve." Alexander smiled, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Then let's figure it out together." He stood up suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait, but..." Elena's eyes widened as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Marry me, Elena." She gasped, her hands covering her mouth. "Alexander, I don't need anything fancy. I don't need tradition. I just need you." He opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Say yes." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. She had spent her whole life fighting to survive, never imagining something like this could happen to her. But when she looked at Alexander, she saw nothing but love. With a shaky breath, she whispered, "Yes." Alexander let out a breath of relief, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a warm embrace. For the first time in her life, Elena wasn't just surviving, she was loved. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Elena, in a modest yet elegant white dress, stood beside Alexander, surrounded by close friends and a few of the construction workers who had once been her colleagues. There were no extravagant decorations, no over-the-top displays of wealth, just warmth, love, and the quiet realization that her life had forever changed. For the first time, she wasn't alone. Marriage to Alexander was nothing like the stories she had once overheard in laundromats or foster homes. He didn't just give her a comfortable life, he gave her respect, patience, and encouragement. At first, Elena felt like a guest in her own life. She still woke up early, still cleaned, still hesitated before accepting anything for herself. But Alexander gently reminded her, time and time again, that this was her home now. One evening, she sat across from him at the dining table, fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. "I don't want to just be a woman who married well," she admitted. "I want to do something that matters." Alexander set down his fork, watching her with quiet admiration. "Then do it." She blinked. "But I don't know where to start." He smiled. "You start by remembering where you came from." Elena knew exactly what that meant. She had once been a girl with nothing, no home, no food, no one to turn to. There were others like her, wandering the streets, sleeping in empty buildings, working themselves to exhaustion just to survive. She wanted to help them. With Alexander's support, she started small. She visited shelters, talked to social workers, listened to the stories of struggling young women. She learned what resources were available and what was missing. Then, she made a decision. Using part of the Pierce family's wealth, Elena opened the Haven House, a shelter and skills training center for homeless women. It was more than just a place to sleep. It was a space where women could learn skills, find job opportunities, and regain their confidence. She personally met with every woman who walked through its doors, offering them the same kindness she had once desperately needed. "I know what it's like," she would tell them. "I know how hard it is to believe in yourself when the world has given up on you. But you are more than your circumstances." One chilly December evening, as Elena was locking up Haven House for the night, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miss Elena?" She turned to see Maggie, a woman she had met at a shelter months ago, someone who had once been too afraid to even make eye contact. Now, Maggie stood before her wearing a crisp uniform, holding the keys to her very first apartment. "I got the job," she said, tears in her eyes. "I start next week." Elena felt her own eyes sting with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Maggie." The two women embraced, and for the first time in her life, Elena fully understood what it meant to change someone's story. Years passed, and Elena continued her work. She and Alexander built a life based on love, not wealth. They raised a family, teaching their children the importance of kindness, humility, and perseverance. And every time someone asked her, "How did you get here?" she would simply smile and say, "Someone believed in me. And now, I do the same for others." Life is a way of testing us, often in ways we never expect. Elena's journey is a reminder that no matter how dark our circumstances may seem, perseverance, kindness, and humility can lead us to a brighter future. She faced loss, rejection, and hardship, yet she never allowed bitterness to take root in her heart. Instead, she remained strong, kept working hard, and embraced the kindness of others when it was given to her. For those in their later years, this story holds a valuable lesson: our past does not define us, but our actions do. Just as Alexander saw Elena's worth beyond her circumstances, we, too, can choose to uplift those who need a helping hand. Whether it's offering wisdom to a younger generation, supporting those in need, or simply treating others with compassion, our kindness can change lives. Elena's decision to give back proves that true success isn't measured by wealth but by the impact we leave on others. No matter our age, we all have something to offer: a lesson, a story, a helping hand. And sometimes, that is what makes all the difference.